Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're recording this over Zoom because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if it sounds a bit iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us.
Welcome to our new series of podcasts in which our volunteer Will of Ask the Expert podcast fame goes behind the scenes at the MS Trust. He'll be interviewing some of the teams who provide the useful information, resources and support to people with multiple sclerosis every day.
And because Will is a volunteer with MS himself, he'll be asking some of those questions that you may always been wondering but never had a chance to ask.
First up, let's hear what Megan, who's the head of health professionals programs here at the MS Trust, had to say about the work that we do in the healthcare sector, like training and placing more MS nurses in the NHS.
Breaking it down. Today I am joined by Megan Roberts. Megan is an MS nurse, a consultant MS nurse since 1996, and she is now the head of the health professional department of the MS Trust. She's also the founder of the UK Multiple Sclerosis Specialised Nurse Association, which, as its name indicates, is an association of specialised MS nurses. Megan, welcome.
Thank you. Hello. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you on the episode. It's nice to kind of hear from the people working behind the scenes at the MS Trust. So how long have you been working for the MS Trust?
So I joined the MS Trust officially in 2017, but I was working for them on a sort of a contract basis for a couple of years before that. So I've been around a little while now.
And so what does in what capacity are you? You're heading the health professional team? What does the health professional team do?
So the health professional team is myself and our director, Paru, and my colleague, Delia. And between us, we run different educational events. So we're in charge of conference, which we have once a year. And we also run a program called the development module, which we run twice a year. And that's a course that we run for people who are new in post, so for health professionals who are new to MS. And we run different programs to try and increase the numbers of health professionals that are out there working for people with MS. So we have a specialist nurse program and an advanced MS champions program. So we do all sorts of things.
Speaking of the advanced MS champion program, there was an episode of Breaking It Down about this where Peru, whom you've mentioned, was interviewed and speaks in detail about this. So you have been... what took you to MS nursing? Because you've been a specialist MS nurse since 1996. And that's kind of a long career. So you were working with the MS Trust before you were working for them. Now, I do know that the MS Trust has been training all of the MS nurses in the UK since, I want to say 2002?
Yeah, about then, I
correct
think.
Me. But before that, was it sort of a bit of a wild... How did you come to this specialization?
Yeah. So I during my training, I had my nurse training. I did some a rotation on a neurology ward and really enjoyed it. So then when I qualified, I got a job on a neurology ward and stayed there and looked after all sorts of people with all sorts of conditions. But MS was obviously a big part of that. And then I was there when beta-feron first became available. That was back in 1996. And they needed a specialist nurse to teach people how to inject themselves with beta-feron. So I kind of jumped around and waved my hand in the air and convinced the consultants that I was the woman for the job. So I was one of the first MS nurses around at that point. And that was in Salford, in Greater Manchester. So I worked there as the specialist nurse there I left there in 2010. So I built the services up there and that's where I became the nurse consultant there and really, really enjoyed that. Loved doing that job.
So what is the... Because, I mean, when I was diagnosed, I found out there was such a thing as an MS nurse, because they're on the board of the clinic saying, and in that consultation room, you have the MS nurse. What is to describe it to someone that may not only be peripherically aware of that world, what would you succinctly describe the role of an MS nurse?
So I think an MS nurse is there to provide information, to provide continuity for the person diagnosed with MS and their family, but also to be the person they could go to who will explain things, who will interpret what the doctors have said or the MRI scan is showing, and also be an advocate for that person if they need that, to be their kind of cheerleader and supporter and, understand what the issues are for that individual and help them to navigate the healthcare and get the care they need at the right time that they need it.
And unfortunately, there are still too many MS patients that are not under the care of an MS nurse, as I gather. So I don't.
As it's certainly a lot of people, far too many people. We're just doing a survey at the moment that we try and do every couple of years. We missed last year because of COVID, but where we look at and map exactly how many MS nurses there are across the country. And then we can match that to the prevalence estimates in each sort of locality and get, it's not an exact science, but it gives us some sense of how big the gap is. So we should have the results of that later this year, September, October. That'd be useful.
And one of the things the MS trusts do, kind of slightly behind the scene, because it's not directly in contact with the patients, is trying to increase that number, and also, as you said, with the services map, which you can look on mstrust.org.uk. You click to resources, MS services near me, and so all of that survey actually feeds into the website, and you have access to this information. It's not just nurses; you get physio, there's like support groups and the like. But yeah, so they're identifying areas of need and trying to raise those numbers. What's the total number of MS nurses, or a ballpark figure, right, of MS nurses that the trust has trained since 2002?
Gosh, I'm not sure. Most of them, I would say. I think that there's about roughly 300 MS nurses in the country, and then they're not all full time. But most of those we will have trained at some point or another. That's actually one of the questions in our survey that's out with them at the moment, is to try and find out how many have actually attended the course. So some of the really old hands, like myself, we missed it.
Yeah, you became an MS nurse before the MS Trust was training
right.
MS nurses.
So I was doing some of the teaching rather than some of the learning, but it is a great opportunity for people now.
So, and do you know roughly what's the sort of cohort size, like how many graduate, as it were, from the training every year?
So we run it twice a year, and we have about 30 on each course. So about 60 people go through every year, and it's specialist therapists and pharmacists as well as MS nurses.
Yes, hence the name health professionals, right? Yeah. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the Advanced Champion program. This is targeted at MS nurses, but also I think physio can get involved. It's the idea of having, well, you can speak of it. You're better suited than I am.
Yeah, so this is MS specialists, so nurses, therapists, physios, occupational therapists, anybody who's got that sort of interest and MS expertise. And it's a role that's focused on looking after or supporting people who've got the most complex needs, who've got the most severe types of MS, who are perhaps struggling and physically find it difficult to get into a clinic or a hospital. It might be physically impossible for some people. And it came out of a piece of work that the MS Trust did a few years ago called MS Forward View, where we looked at how the role of the MS nurse had shifted. When I first started, we were able to provide some sort of care for people across the whole pathway from diagnosis right through. But then as the DMDs became more and more choices and more monitoring needed, which is fantastic. It's great that so many DMDs out there, but it increases the workload for that cohort of patients for the MS nurse, and then means that they have less time, unfortunately, then to spend with other people who aren't on the DMDs. Now, a lot of nurses do manage to sort of provide care across the whole pathway, but it's more difficult for a lot of teams now. So by focusing care within these roles, and they can really target the most complex cases. Some people have a lot of social problems as well as the physical and emotional problems that go with severe MS. So so it's great to be able to set these roles up, and we're just coming to the end of the pilot scheme for that. And again, the report around the pilot should be out later this year. And
so how many champions are in the initial pilot scheme, and how many do you hope to train every year?
Well, we had funding for 6 within the pilot scheme, so that's sort of where we're at the moment. We're hoping to be able to fund probably a couple next year, and then sort of build from that, really. It's a matter of getting the funding in, partly, but yeah. Well,
I think this is also why we're doing that. This if you're listening to this and you've got a little bit of extra funds, disposable income that you may want to put to a good cause. At least if you were to donate to the MS Trust, no one's forcing your hand. No pressure, but you will know where that goes. Let's talk DMDs a little bit. I want to kind of do a segue because I'm a person with MS myself. I was diagnosed in 2015, and I am blown away talking to different generations of people with MS, and particularly when the report Time Matters, where the new policy of putting people on DMDs first. From your perspective, having started in MS specialization in 1996, you must have seen the whole arc of the progress, because it's come leaps and bounds in the past 10, 20, 30 years, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. From before I started as a specialist nurse, as I say, I worked on the ward, so I was looking after people with MS who'd, never even been able to be offered anything, and hadn't even, there weren't the support services there either in those days that there are now, whether or not you're on a BMD. So the care was hugely different, and I think that really shows now in I think people's outcomes and support, etc., is much better by and large for the majority of people now than it used to be. But I think I remember when betaferon was first available, we were offering it to a handful of people, really, looking back. But people were so thrilled to be able to be offered just anything at that stage. There was nothing else really that were offered at that point, and people would become very emotional. Being offered the opportunity to answer betaferon when there was nothing else, and it was it felt like a great privilege to be there at that point and be able to help people to get started on treatments, and then seeing those treatments build over the years has been amazing. And now more, most recently seeing treatments that are now approved for people with more progressive types of MS.
Yes, that's another big point on DMDs, where we need more of those to trickle for approval for progressive indications. Yes. It's great news. I mean, because we especially over the last 10, 15 years in the UK with austerity and whatnot. But it has to be said that although there's still a lot of road to cover, there's been huge progress in terms of the effectiveness and the breadth of the selection of medicines offered to patients, and also in terms of of course, as you said, now the role of the MS nurse is much more about knowing about all of those weird namely medicine and the pros and cons of each, and there's a lot more of that. So it's interesting that you started, your first thing was to just kind of be able to teach patients about self-injection, and then now it's like, okay, so here's the full list of what you could be having, and I know, but that's very great. I'm very excited by the general. I mean, that's the thing, when you have MS, it's good news and bad news, right? But the good news is that you're at the cutting edge of medical science. The bad news is that you're at the cutting edge of medical science. So it swings both ways.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's have a little one on the annual conference. So this is more for health professionals. Patients are presumably not already invited, although unless they maybe make podcasts or can qualify as sort of media, right? So when and how is that held? What's the target audience? Is it international or national?
It's national largely. So it's usually a face-to-face conference. It was traditionally always in November. It runs over 2.5 days. But we're actually switching to sort of end of March now. I think it's just with everything that's going on out there at the moment, it's easier for health professionals to get away at that time. So this year, for the first time, we did a virtual conference, which was an adventure, an experience. But it went well. We got really good reviews, and that was good. Good feedback. But we're hoping to go face to face again in March next year. At the end of March, that's our next one. So we're just planning for that at the moment. But it's a fantastic opportunity. We have usually about 300 health professionals from all over the country. It's again, MS nurses, therapists, a smattering of neurologists. And we have a really packed programme. We have experts again, in their field from all over the country and sometimes internationally, and find out about the latest research, everything from, sort of the gut microbiome to the latest ways to treat and manage severe spasticity. So it's great. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I love this stuff. Whenever there's like an opportunity to, I did like the Zoom era, because then you could kind of attend scientific conferences from the comfort of your living room. Speaking of this, well, I mean, we're recording this in, let's say, for posterity. We're in August 2021. If you're listening to this in the future after the robot uprising, we saw it coming all along. We did nothing. Anyway, so COVID, of course, that's the big thing. The impact, I'd like to talk a bit about the impact on the MS services as a whole, but also on patients, and get your personal perspective, because also for you, there's the training of the MS nurses, or indeed I'm told that some of the training of MS nurses had been suspended for a while because nurses were getting poached for ICU wards anyway. So what's your view on the switch to remote appointments and so on as a nurse?
So I think, MS services have, as all services have been badly hit, in the sense that a lot of MS nurses and neurologists and therapists were all redeployed and taken away from MS services, certainly sort of last year when it was at its worst. And that's still happening to some extent. Although there's much more recognition now that all the services, but MS services being our priority, do need to build up again, that there's a backlog now of people who need to be seen and treatments that need to be sorted for people. So there is, a will there within the management that the specialists stay within MS now and try and put that back together and rebuild the services. I think people have faced long delays and found it more difficult to get a hold of their specialists when they've needed to. I think a lot of people have done their best to get on with it and do the best they can, sort of, managing without the specialists, knowing they were very busy. But I think part of the result of that and part of the results of being locked down and told to stay at home and all of that is that a lot of people with MS have become what we call deconditioned, but not as fit, not as healthy as they were. They're not walking around. They're perhaps not just, even just walking from your car across the car park to the supermarket or into work or wherever you go is provides a certain level of fitness. And if people are not doing that routinely, then it becomes more difficult. So that's something that we're hearing about, and certainly I know that the therapists are trying to do a lot to address.
But did you also hear maybe positives? I mean, I know that for a lot of people with mobility issues, being able to do it over the phone, it might be a simpler proposition. I for one, do like that. No, it's all, because most of your appointments don't involve a physical examination. It's more of a chat. And that has some, I guess some silver lining. I hesitate to call them upside, but, there are ups to the going remote.
No, definitely. And I think it was really interesting because it's, for years, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, within the health service, we've been talking about, yes, we should do more telephone appointments. And, oh, gosh, wouldn't it be novel if we did video appointments? And then suddenly, almost overnight, it was kind of all these problems that have been too huge to solve. Well, oh, that's fine. Yes, do it. It's great. And it just happened. But yes, no, definitely. I think that is very much an upside. And I think it makes it a lot easier for a lot of people. And I think what we have to be a little bit careful of now is to make sure the balance is right. I think telephone appointments are here to stay, and absolutely I think they should be. I think they're great in a lot of circumstances, but there are times when it's much better to have the face-to-face consultation, and I think it's just making sure that balance is there, that it's not only telephone appointments that are offered.
How did you find? Did you switch to virtuality for remote training as well? Because I've talked to teachers and lecturers and so on, and people tend to find it difficult to not have the sort of body language feedback of someone in the room whether they're following along. What was your experience with that?
We did. So the development module that we do is normally a week-long residential course. So of course we couldn't do that. So we've had to switch that to. Bless them, we did that over a whole week of Zoom. But we did our best to break it up and make it as interactive as possible. And actually it worked much better than we thought it would. It was kind of that or they missed out, really. So it was, people accepted that and understood that. And it also made it a lot easier for people who normally would have, coming away for a week, quite enjoy, but have huge childcare issues or difficulties with travel and things. Oh, fly. And I think, the feedback we got from some of the speakers, the presenters, was that, it was weird. You didn't get that feedback from the students, but actually, as we understood the process much better and got more used to it, I think we were able to encourage the students. There was a lot more interaction on the chat, and we were able to feed that to the presenters, and it worked really well, actually. It was the next best thing.
So is that something that you might keep for going forward for the future?
Possibly. I think we're considering that. So the next one is in October. So we're running that one over Zoom again. And then the one after that is in April next year. So we're hoping that one will be residential. But it might be that we offer, one of each year. We'll see as we go forward how things work out. It might be, a lot of people from Scotland and that, for example, find it much easier to, rather than having to travel all the way down to Stevenage to,
of course,
for a week. So we'll see.
So do you have any personal connection to MS? How did you, what took you down that road? You mentioned the sort of neurology rotation, which is often amongst doctors and nurses. It's like what you do during your junior training. There might be a specialty or specialism that sort of, applies or sort of really attracts your attention. But is there maybe a family connection, or did you know people with MS before that? Were you inspired by a patient?
Yeah, not. There's no family connection. There's nobody in my family with it. I think it, as I say, it was just something that I enjoyed in my training and then working on the wards. It was, I sort of get particularly close to people with MS, and I think I'm not the sort of nurse that I would have made a lousy theatre nurse or a lousy A&E nurse. I'm not somebody who thrives on, crisis and lots of machinery, and I'm much better sat talking to somebody and having that conversation, and that fitted well with sort of what people with MS needed, somebody to explain what was happening and listen to what was happening to them and feed that back. So it kind of suited me, if you like. And then I think once I'd started, there were some hugely inspirational patients. And I think there was one, a couple of people in particular who I always have in the back of my mind when I'm looking at the Advanced MS Champions program, particularly that I'm doing. I remember one young lad who was diagnosed, and he progressed very quickly and sadly died within a few years, which is rare, but obviously was, really tragic at the time. And I worked so closely with him and his mum and trying to get the services in. And we always felt that the disease was a step ahead. We just, finally, we've got this piece of equipment that you need. Oh, no, we can't use it now. He's progressed too far. And it was just a continual battle. And I'm still in touch with his mum now. We kind of felt like we went through a lot together almost, although obviously very different for her. But so there was people like that were really inspirational, their whole families, and trying to do whatever we can to improve services for that group of people, I think is my heart.
And presumably there's the same spirit of noticing there's something missing and trying to do whatever you can to improve services that led to you co-founding the UK MS Specialist Nurse Association.
Yeah, I mean, that was quite a way. So that was in the early 2000s, I think, about 2001, 2003. I can't remember exactly that sort of period. So there was a whole group of us then, and got together, and that was the MS Trust at the time helped us, sort of facilitated that with us, and helped us set that up. And it was really to sort of help us share best practice, and there still is to some extent, but certainly in the early days there was always a lot of what is an MS nurse? Why do we need an MS nurse? You're very expensive. Well, why should we be paying for you? And we felt we were continually having to make the argument to our managers, to commissioners, about the importance of the role. So we felt that bringing together a sort of a national association, if you like, was important and would give us a more solid voice to make the case for why we needed specialist nurses.
And so this is where you got the 300 members figure from, where you have presumably across the country around 300 MS nurses, or is this because this is specifically for nursing? It's not like the conference, which is like all health professional, just to situate it. So you get like this sort of collective bargaining power and more leverage in group, classic union tactic.
That's right. I mean, there is a similar group for the therapists. The therapists have a group called TIMS, which is Therapists in MS, which the MS Trust also helped support and help them.
They kind of got a better acronym there, right?
They have. I wasn't involved in that acronym, so that's why that's so much better.
Right. So you were awarded, I see in your biography on the neurologyacademy.org, this is where I'm kind of drawing, that you were awarded the Making a Difference Award by the UK MSSNA in 2008, and then the Most Innovative MS Nurse Award at the 10-year anniversary of the UK MSSNA, which was probably 2012. I mean, going a little bit beyond the fact that it's an organization that you founded and created that's giving you the award, so you think there might be a little bias, but could you tell us a little bit more about that? Is it a yearly thing, and like what does it particularly focus on to give the award?
So I think the Making a Difference Award, I think they still do, to be honest. I think because of the last couple of years, I think there might have been a bit of a hiatus in that, but they have been awarding that annually, and that's always been something that they as a committee, and I haven't been involved for a long time, that they as a committee discuss between themselves and look at who's, who are the leaders amongst the peers that year, who's perhaps done something a little bit different, who's out there making a difference and speaking up for MS nurses, sort of, making the case, if you like, for, why MS nurses are important and why, the whole point of an MS nurse is to make a difference to people living with MS. And that's certainly what's always driven me. So that was one of my practice.
I'm getting, speaking with you, I'm getting the impression that the MS nurse, from the point of view of the nurse themselves, is about making a difference to the patient. But for this to actually work in real life, like across the whole of the country and the health system, then we need leaders and consultants like you, and then the nurses to associate to make a difference, and in the way for the MS nurses, in the way they are, engaged with by services, in the way the awareness is raised about the need and so on. So it's great. I think it's great you're doing that. Well, so just to wrap up, I'm going to assume your time is evidently very precious. Thank you again for that, and I'll leave you for that. But or kind of standard parting words, goodbye question. If you have one piece of advice for someone that might be living with MS, or especially someone that may be recently diagnosed, from your point of view, because we hear about patient stories and we ask that question and they will give us their answer based on their own experience since their diagnosis. But you have met presumably hundreds, if not thousands, of MS patients, and so you were able to really compare and contrast and really truly appreciate the variability of MS. That everyone is different for everyone. We keep repeating that, but very few people have got the privilege of actually witnessing it in real life. So, what would be your piece of advice for someone recently diagnosed with MS?
Gosh, I think probably just be kind to yourself. Which don't expect too much of yourself too soon, but at the same time, go for it. MS can open doors as well as feeling as though it's shutting them. I've seen so many people finding opportunities in their lives that they wouldn't have sought out, or they wouldn't have gone down that path if it hadn't been for MS. So I think there can be positives and it can open doors as well. But I think
that's very inspirational. Thank you very much, Megan. And indeed, I believe we have, if you look a little bit further back in the feed of the podcast, I do believe we have episodes about people who have changed their careers, not necessarily because of MS, but this kind of idea of post-traumatic growth. Anyway, Megan, thank you ever so much for your time. It was great having a chat with you, and thanks a lot for all the good work, and we'll kind of be interested to see what comes out of the conference and the development modules, and I wish you the best to increase those numbers. Thank you very much, Megan.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
And we're back.
So we've heard from Megan about our health professionals programs, but what about those who actually work in the NHS and do the jobs themselves?
Here's Laura, who is a MS support nurse, in conversation with Will.
I am now joined by Laura, who is an MS specialist nurse, and she's just a recent alumna, or indeed graduate, of the MS Trust Development Module, and has recently become an MS nurse. Laura, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
It's great. Likewise, it's great to have you, on the interview, because we can hear from the health professional department and from the development program of the MS Trust, but from the other side. How long have you been a nurse, and more specifically than that, how long have you been specialized in neurology?
So I've been a nurse for around 17 years. Most of that I've always worked within neuroscience. I've done neurology, neuroscience, neurorehabilitation, and even spinal injuries. So I've got the collection. But I joined the MS team a year ago. So because during the pandemic, the MS team were redeployed to the ward that I was working on to help with our staffing issues and everything. And so I was introduced to the MS team, and that's when I joined the MS team a year ago during the pandemic.
And so then you have gone yourself through the development module run by the health professional department of the MS Trust. Could you tell us a bit about that? How long does it take? What does it entail?
Okay, so obviously this year it was done virtually. So it was a week of virtual seminars, which initially I was a little bit nervous about because obviously now I'm a bit more used to using Zoom and everything. But prior to that, I definitely would say I'm the type of person who likes to learn face-to-face, in person. I'm practical. So I was a bit nervous about how it would all work, whether I'd be confident enough to sort of participate over Zoom, but it worked really well, actually. For me, we were able to participate in, all these different seminars. So it was a really good introduction. So we had a week of the Zoom seminars, and Then I had the opportunity to do a module in MS Care. So that was a level 7 module. And as a result, now I'm going on to do my master's. So it was a good stepping stone. So I enjoyed it that much that I'm going to do some more studying.
And so you mentioned the impact of the pandemic and having to go virtual for the training, but how about the actual care itself?
So I have no basis for comparison because I joined within the pandemic. Nearly all of my patient contact has been over the phone. So yeah, it's been challenging. But, there are elements that have been successful. But as you say, we're very much hoping to go back to some face-to-face appointments where it works best for the patients, because we cover quite a wide area. I think doing it over the telephone for some patients has worked well. So, but we're hoping to sort of move forward with a bit of a hybrid now so that we can see some of our patients who really would benefit from that face-to-face contact. I think people who have been newly diagnosed have missed out because we've had to just talk to them over the phone. And some of our more complex patients, I think there are certain people that we really want to move forward now and be able to start doing face-to-face, but we're still in the process really of trying to figure out the best way to manage it safely and within, the restrictions and that we're still sort of facing,
Absolutely. Everyone's finding their footing but we are keeping some of the remote and virtual appointments and hopefully get the best of both worlds, because as you said, it is also tremendously convenient on some other side. What are the priorities for MS nurses at the moment? What are the biggest challenges and arguably the biggest improvements you could seek in that field?
Well, I think where we've moved forward as well is we've got obviously our day unit where the infusions are administered. Now, as a result of the pandemic, we've had massive staffing issues. Obviously, I'm sure that's reflected across the whole of the UK. So after initially being redeployed to the ward where I was working, which is how I met the team, we're now doing one shift a week on the infusion unit. So that's offsetting some of the staffing issues. But it was always anticipated there'd be a closer link with the day unit, which was prior to the pandemic run by neurology nurses. But now every day there's an MS nurse, because predominantly the patients that we see have got MS. There are other neurological conditions for people who are coming in for their infusions, but it's been a really good link between the team. So I think that's something we want to continue. So something quite positive that's come out of it. So we do get some face-to-face contact with those patients because we're physically administering the infusions. It gives us an opportunity to have a chat and do some symptom management and, just to get to know our patients a little bit better,
Get that human feel, of course. It's having being looked after and having a team, that also know the specifics is like very, very important. So treatment-wise, so what are you infusing? Because I like to keep the temperature of what's trendy. I was talking to some patients and everyone was very excited about Kesimpta, because it's like only once a month and so on. And you've got the Ocrevus crowd, but like the Ocrevus crowd are not super happy because of the impact on immunity with COVID vaccinations. And then there's also some Tysabri is still very strong contender. What's going on? Tell us, like fresh from the field.
Well, we still give alemtuzumab. So obviously, we give Tysabri monthly, and we're moving over to subcutaneous Tysabri. So that's kind of exciting. So that's going to have
and that would be self-administered?
Health professionals will administer it. So at the moment, people come in for Tysabri obviously once a month. They have their infusion, which means they're in the unit for potentially about an hour and a half, 2 hours, So it's going to have a massive impact on the time that people are in the unit. So it means that we'll be able to see more patients. So that's going to have an impact potentially on staffing and things like that. So, it's all, we're on the cusp of change there. And I think a lot of people are really keen to change. I mean, it's definitely down to patient choice. Some people want to continue with their infusions because that's what they're familiar with. So that's absolutely fine. But I would say probably about 75% of patients are really keen to move over to subcutaneous.
If you can have the same thing, but it's quicker, why not? Absolutely. I can. And it's interesting. You make a very interesting point because as a patient, you do your sort of cost or risk benefit calculation in terms of efficacy and side effects and so on. But if you take the broader picture, the actual, workload onto the health services of this or that treatment is something that's got to be factored in. But anything that's self-administered or can just be a quick injection is something that we look for. So there's
and easier to manage, I think, social distancing as well, because that's still obviously a major issue.
Now, I was told that you also fundraise for the MS Trust. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I was as part of the development module, of course, I got to know some of the other people on the course. We discovered that some of us had a common interest in running, walking. We were training. We thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to support each other? You know, some of us were training for marathons and everything. Mm-hmm. And so we had this idea, well, how about we all club our miles together and do some fundraising at the same time? So I thought, well, we all live somewhere within the UK. So we thought if we try and cover the length of the UK from Land's End to John O'Groat, and I find when I'm running, it clears my mind. So it actually helped me with my studying and everything. I find if I go for a run in the morning, then I come down and sit in the computer, I just work better anyway. So
how many miles did you personally run? And then how much was the big total with everyone involved? How many people were involved in this?
There was 15 of us that were involved in accumulating the miles. All in all, we covered more than 1,900 miles, which meant we covered the length of the UK twice. So we ran from Land's End to John O'Groats and back again. So, as I say, I'm not sure how many I did personally, and it wasn't the most, but I did a fair few, though.
And have you got any plans to fundraise in the future? Anything we could promote?
Well, I am running the London Marathon virtually. So, and obviously for the MS Trust, I was always going to run the marathon for the MS Trust. But then because we had this idea to do, a joint fundraising, I kind of put all of my effort for fundraising into that. So I'm still training for the London Marathon, and I do have a link. So I'll post it to you if you like.
Publish it in the show note, I'm sure. Do you have any advice for any health professional, maybe a nurse that may be considering a specialization, and if you could, if they're interested in neurology and neuroscience, maybe in MS itself, would you recommend it? What's your advice?
Absolutely. I think it's the best career move I've made. I'm so happy with the career move I've made. It's the learning curve. When I first joined, I was like, wow, this is so different to what I'm used to. How am I going to learn all this? How am I going to adapt? And then but of course you do. And there's lots of support. And I'm so lucky. I work with such a great team. So I work in Cardiff. I've got some really good friends on the team now. And we've got brilliant physio and OT and the doctors. It's a really inspiring team. And it's a great job. It's really rewarding. So I would definitely recommend if there's an opportunity to become a specialist nurse, especially in MS, it's definitely a good career move. So go for it.
Excellent, thank you. And then we have also a final question for all of our guests. Now, off the back of you only have a short time of experience dealing directly with people with MS in your role, but maybe you have one piece of advice for someone newly diagnosed or someone who might be, struggling dealing with the disease.
Well, I would just say that when you're newly diagnosed, I'm sure it's a massive shock, but just take time to get used to the idea. I'm sure it's overwhelming at first, although some people feel that there is some element of relief because they've finally got some answers and a plan can be made, but it is overwhelming. There's a lot of treatment options out there and probably so much unknown initially, but I would reassure people that there's so much support out there. There's your MS team, and even though our team is a little bit more restricted as to what we would normally offer, the MS Trust has got really good support. There's so much information, some good information out there, and they're not alone, in the journey. So that's what I would say. We're there every step of the way, and there's going to be lots of options, and you're going to have a good team helping you every step of the way.
Excellent. Well, Laura, thank you very much for your time. I'll let you get back to it because it's a weekday. You're probably at work. Thanks a lot again for your continued efforts, and best of luck for the rest of your MS nurse specialized career.
Thank you. It's nice to talk to you.
And we're back. It's interesting to sort of see the other side, the other side of the curtain of what's going on at the MS Trust, isn't it? Because you're fairly new to the trust still, aren't you, Emma? But I mean, I've been here for nearly 14 years, and I still find that it's amazing to hear about the training that goes on, and it's nice to hear how useful it is for the nurses who've been through the training. I think it's it's probably one of those things that people get surprised every time when you say to them, oh no, but pretty much all MS nurses are trained by the MS Trust.
Yeah, I think definitely, like you say, I'm still fairly new. And when I first started, one of the things I was aware of before starting at the MS Trust was just how much support you guys provide, obviously, through the inquiry service and producing those resources for people with MS. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily quite so clear about how much we do in terms of funding those key NHS roles.
And I think, obviously the placing new nurses in place and the advanced MS champions is a fairly new thing. It's been going for a few years, but if I'm thinking of the time that I've been at the MS Trust, and it's something that we're very proud of, and it's great that we're doing. It's a shame we have to do it, because you would hope that the NHS would be able to fund the nurses themselves. But obviously that is a thing that's not happening. So we're glad to try and help out. And that's sort of where some of the money that we do get from the fundraising events and our fantastic donors and things go to. So it's very nice to see this sort of what goes on in the HP team. And I think I love listening to Will interviewing things, because he thinks about things that I don't think about when I talk to people and interview them. So yeah, I thought it was interesting. Also hearing Megan's background, it's funny because you work with these people, but you don't necessarily know what they were doing beforehand.
It was nice to hear from Megan, and also from Laura as well, sort of her background and why working as an MS support nurse sort of appealed to her. And then again, like when she covered bits like what different treatments and things were coming up, it was nice to see that, because you read about it in the news, but you don't know whether that's come about yet and how people are feeling about it. So it was nice to sort of get the word from almost the front line.
Yeah, exactly. Because we know what's available on paper. We can provide that information on the website, but like what's actually sort of being used out there in treatment, because it doesn't necessarily mean that all different services have got all the treatment options and things. So yeah, it's a pretty confusing thing, the world of disease modifying treatment.
If you'd like to know more about the work that the MS Trust does, including how we help fund specialist roles, visit mstrust.org.uk and click on the What We Do tab.
And as always, remember, if you have any questions about MS, we're here for you. Our inquiry service is available from Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of these hours, you can leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
You can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts, as well as Amazon Music. Get in touch if there's any topics you'd like to hear more about. And of course, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe.
And we would like to say a big thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for the music of this podcast. And of course to Will, our lovely producer and interviewer and just podcast star extraordinaire. And to Megan and Laura for this involvement in this podcast.